today. I am Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev. I'm the Director of Organizational Capacity Building here at the National Community Action Partnership, and I am joined by my colleague, Erin Wicks, who is the Vice President of Organizational Capacity Building here at the partnership. And both of us are really excited to be here to talk about going beyond the organizational standards and how we can move from meeting to exceeding, or the frame that we use a lot of times is from compliance to excellence. And so it's a topic that Erin and I both get very jazzed about. We will try to keep our nerdum contained as best as we can. But as always, guys, if you have questions, thoughts, best practices you want to share, please go ahead and throw those into the chat, raise your hand. I think we're even in meeting mode, so you're able to unmute yourself. Just ask that you be mindful that you put yourself back on mute after you're done speaking. So with that, I'll just move us straight on ahead. We want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement, because we recognize that every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed to the history that made this moment. And so I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Osage people. In my case, I'm calling from Louisville, Kentucky. And I want to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And welcome you to put your own land acknowledgement in the chat if you would like. Also want to take a moment to ground ourselves in the promise of community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies a spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And something that I want you to reflect on in this moment, as we're kind of introducing this topic, is if we can live into our promise, this promise, by being simply compliant agencies, by simply meeting requirements, or does the promise call for us to be more than just compliant, but really to be excellent? So I'll let you do some reflecting on that while we introduce the topic. So what we hope to do today, we want to cover a little bit about the history of the org standards, kind of go back in history and time, and just ground ourselves in the why of the standards, and why the organizational standards are actually not about excellence. And then we want to talk a little bit about organizational transformation and steps for organizational improvement. We want to talk about some very practical ways for you to go beyond the benchmarks. And then would love to talk a little bit about some resources that we have for pursuing excellence. And I'm going to go off script briefly here, and just ask folks to picture in your minds and maybe put into the chat a few words. If I said, what does it mean to be compliant? What does it mean to be compliant? What does that bring up for you? What does that mean? You can put it in the chat. You could shout it out. Regulatory, living in a regulative space. What else? What else comes to mind for folks when you hear the term compliance? Organizationally, the minimum, doing the minimum. Just doing what we got to do to get by. Yep. Well, let me grant related in good standing. Yeah. It's usually driven, compliance is usually driven by an outside party, right? Passing on the pass fail. Yes. You're not getting an A+, but you're passing. Adhering to policy procedures, following direction, instruction agreements, following expectations. Okay, yes, thanks, guys. These are some really great points. I think point a really nice picture of what compliance is for us. Now I want to flip that question. I want to ask you, when I say the term excellence, what does that mean? What does that bring up for you, the term excellence? What does it mean to be excellent? compliance is important. We have to start there. Yes, yes, we do. But what does excellence bring up for folks? Okay, I see a couple comments coming in. Going above what is required. Yeah, going beyond those basic requirements, going beyond compliance, maybe exceeding expectations, going after the A or the A plus. Yes, exhibiting creativity and willingness to take risks and try new approaches. So yeah, I think that you guys are kind of seeing that there's a difference between compliance, which is extremely important, as Erin pointed out, and excellence. One of your colleagues just said quality in work, accountability, organization, thoughtfulness, caring, appreciation in the work done, meeting deadlines. So exceeding what is expected of us is when you get into excellence. Usually when you're in excellence, you're well regarded, you're respected, it's going above and beyond just the minimum requirement. And now, as Erin had framed up, in order to be excellent, you can't be excellent without first being compliant. Compliance is a building block of excellence, but excellence is not the same thing as merely meeting a requirement or a standard. And so it's in this frame that I want us to start to reflect on organizational standards. We've spent a lot of time talking about how you can be compliant with the organizational standards. And I just want to remind us why the organizational standards exist and really what they serve to do. Back in 2011, you can reflect on where were you on this fateful night in February of 2011 when then President Obama was giving his State of the Union address. And he said something to the effect of, I am willing to cut programs I care deeply about, such as community action programs. And I think I heard the collective gasp from all of my community action friends from around the country. We all went, oh my goodness, why would we be cut? We're great programs. And at that time, there was kind of a feeling, I'm not saying it's accurate, I'm just going to say it was a feeling that community action perhaps was not super innovative, that we weren't really accountable, that we had kind of gone stale, that we were just getting, this kind of federally protected money over and over again, and no one was, that we weren't living up to the expectations and really what communities needed from us. Yes, and Erin said my reaction was the president mentioned community action, yay. Yeah, and then you actually heard what he said, right, Erin? And you're like, oh, right, oh, that's not the context I expected to hear that. But, so in this moment, when this happened, I think we took a step back as a network and we said, okay, so if this is the criticism, how can we give some assurances to Congress, to the American people, to the administration, that community action is an accountable network, that we have the required capacity that is needed to entrust us with being America's poverty fighting network. And so were born the organizational standards. The organizational standards were developed over a very, was it only 9 months, Erin? It felt like a much longer process. Those 9 months felt like 9 COVID months in my mind, but through a very collaborative process with the Community Action Network, where we developed these standards that we said, if you want to be a part of this community action family, if you want to put community action after your name, we have to know that you have the capacity that is necessary to be an effective organization. Now, I didn't say an excellent organization, I said an effective organization. And so we developed these 58 standards for private CAAs and 50 standards for public CAAs. The standards really serve as benchmarks. They are bare minimum requirements for a functioning community action agency. Now, something I want to point out about the organizational standards that you may have picked up on as we've been talking is that a lot of times the organizational standards look to see that an agency has a process in place, or that they do a certain activity, or that they have a certain function. However, the organizational standards sort of stop there. They don't look at how well the process is implemented. They don't look at the deployment of that practice, or the results of that practice. We're really just looking to see again that the bare minimum capacity is there that is necessary for a functioning community action agency. So let's think about that a little bit. So the org standards can really serve as a great starting place then for us to begin to think about how do we go just beyond, how do we become an excellent organization? We have to be compliant with the organizational standards, but there is a space beyond that. Achieving the organizational standards is not a final destination. It's the starting place of a journey where you can go into excellence. And so with that, I want to pass over to Erin to talk a little bit about what it looks like to go beyond just compliance, just having practices that you do in place for organizational standards, and begin to move into an excellence space.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. I mean, I just want to, pick up on a point that Mary Beth made. I think pretty clearly, but I kind of want to just use it to transition into this next part of the presentation, and that is just really thinking about what the org standards mean and what it means to be, compliant. Not as we've already discussed, in terms of this presentation and as well as some of the comments in the chat, but what does it mean to live in that space? And living in that space means that there's kind of a lot of wiggle room, because it's, as someone said in the chat, it's pass fail. So as long as you pass the threshold, you're okay. You might make it up at the last minute, you might improvise, you might do things a little differently each time, but as long as you do the thing that needs to be done, you're meeting the standard. And I think we all know kind of intuitively that that doesn't feel like excellence. That feels it feels repetitive. It feels inefficient. It doesn't feel like we're working as effectively as we could if we're kind of operating in that kind of loosey-goosey space. So the concepts that we use to think, well, what does excellence feel like then? What is the imagery that it should conjure? And two of the words that we like to use are systematizing and institutionalizing. And I always have to slow down when I get to those because I have trouble with multisyllabic words, to be honest. Particularly institutionalizing. I can't even count how many syllables that is. But what do these big words mean? they just mean that we make excellence a habit, and that's really what this quote from Will Durant is telling us. We can use big fancy words, but what does it really mean? We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. It's just the way we do things, and we do it that way every time because we're good. And that's what good, excellent, high-performing organizations do. And so the mechanism to live that way is to have systems in place so that we're not, reinventing the wheel. We're not improvising. We're not saying, oh, I can't do that because so-and-so does that. No. We have a system in place so that anyone who knows the system can do that. Even if so-and-so, with all their knowledge and expertise, even if they leave the organization, that doesn't leave us stranded because we still have a system that the next person can inherit and build on and make better. That's really the key to implementing excellence and making sure that you have alignment and you can transform your organization because you're doing things in a systematic way. Because now you can devote that mental energy and creativity to improving systems rather than redeveloping them anew every time something comes up. So another way of thinking about, kind of what this looks like or what it feels like is a concept that that I really like to use, which is the pairing of two concepts, and that is consciousness and unconsciousness, and competence and incompetence. And if you if you think of the different ways that you can put those different words together, there's 4 ways, right? And you can kind of put them in a continuum, where on sort of the low end is unconscious incompetence, not conscious, not being intentional, not really paying close attention, and at the same time, partly because of that, not doing things well. Okay, so that is the less than ideal way of doing things, and hopefully no one feels that you're operating in that type of space. But that would be the sort of the kind of worst case scenario. The improvement from that, and we've all probably had some moment of consciousness where we're like, you know what, this isn't working. We need to do something better. But in order to do better, you have to kind of go through some trial and error. And you might go through a period of conscious incompetence where you want to do better, you're trying to do better, but you're not there yet. And so you at least have that awareness that things aren't working, they could be better, and we're committed to change, but we're still early in that process. The next step then is conscious competence. And that's where you still have that consciousness. You're still being attentive and aware, but you have made improvements. You're seeing alignment. You're kind of sanding down those rough edges and making your processes smoother. Now, you would think that that's kind of where things end, right? Like, good. Now we're competent. We're doing things well. We've got systems. But here's the thing. We're still in that space of conscious competence. We still have to think about it. It still takes effort and focus. And ideally, what we want to do is go to the next phase, which is unconscious competence, which is where we do things well, as that Will Durant quote suggested. We do them as a matter of habit, not because we have to, think about it and review the policy and make sure we're kind of following the steps that we laid out. It's just built into our DNA and the way we do things. That's where we really see sort of unconscious competence. We're good because it's become a habit, and because it's a habit, as I said a moment ago, we can now devote that conscious energy to either improving other systems that need to be improved or evaluating our wonderful unconscious competence and making it even better. And so that's really the sort of the journey of excellence that we want to sort of lay out for everyone, and encourage you to sort of think about that process and where you are in that process, and also understand that it is a step-by-step process, that you go from one to the other, and it may take time. So the really, I think, important question then is, well, where does that arrow point? I want to go. I want to go towards unconscious competence. I want to improve the way we do things in our agency. But what does excellence look like? Do we have to create this, from whole cloth, or are there some examples? And that's where we want to introduce, and really a big part of this workshop is to introduce in a little depth, not completely, but in comparison to the org standards, introduce the community action standards of excellence, because these are those best practices that exist throughout our network. They're not like, here's what you would do if you were perfect, or here's what an agency in a perfect world looks like, because that'll never happen. These are real world best in class practices. Some of these practices have been inspired by agencies that because they're in your network. Community Action Partnership of San Luis Obispo and Community Action Partnership of Riverside, 2 agencies from California that have achieved the award for excellence. They achieved that award because they implemented these standards and demonstrated that they practice them on a regular basis. And so These standards are available at the partnership website. They're updated regularly. And we want to sort of introduce them to you so you can kind of understand where they come from and why they may be useful as you consider moving from compliance to excellence. So as I said, they're updated regularly. They were first adopted almost 20 years ago, back in 2003. And they were developed by an excellence commission that continues to exist and continues to meet regularly, that is composed of peer leaders throughout the network. These are not outsiders. These are not folks at the partnership or folks at OCS or anywhere else. They are community action practitioners who are just very much committed to supporting our entire network. And so that commission originally developed the standards of excellence, and they also are responsible for keeping them current and making sure that they reflect the evolving best-in-class practices. And we want to emphasize that these standards of excellence, one of the things that distinguishes them from the org standards is that they're voluntary, because it's really important that if we think about taking that next step and moving towards excellence, that it's something we do willingly, not something that feels like it's been imposed upon us. And so one of the things we want to emphasize is that as you think about excellence and implementing that in your agency, how you implement it, always be sure that you're thinking of it as a voluntary principle, that staff buy into it, and that it's not feeling like it's something that's imposed. Otherwise, as Mary Beth just noted in the chat, as soon as you do that, it becomes compliance. People say, oh, that's what we're doing? Okay, so I will do what I have to do. And that's not excellence. So these standards of excellence, they do get pretty concrete, but they also allow some flexibility. And the main thing that they focus on is making sure that agencies have formally adopted and systematically implemented the requirements of each standard. So you have some discretion in terms of how you do things. The standards are not prescriptive and say you must do X, at least not in great detail. Obviously, there are some. They are standards of excellence, so they are prescriptive in some sense. But what they really focus on, what they really prescribe, is that the organization has intentionally adopted systems, and that they have implemented them and have had good results as a result of implementing those systems effectively. What those systems look like, that's for you and your team to decide. So as we think about this journey, and I use the example of moving from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence, we just want to note that there is sort of a trail that's blazed to move towards excellence, and we would invite anyone that is interested to sort of follow the blazed trail. But you can certainly create your own trail if you're so inclined. But if you are looking to kind of follow a path that's been developed, we do have a sort of a multi-tiered program called the Pathways to Excellence program, and it's an optional program. But it kind of walks you through this path to excellence, learning about the standards of excellence, learning about what it means to change that culture. And one of the things that you get from following this particular pathway is that you get feedback from peers. You do an assessment of your agency against the standards. Standard 1.1 says this, and here's how we implement that standard. Here's how it looks in our agency. And then you get feedback from peers across the network who can read that and say, okay, you've got some great things here. You're definitely doing this. you may want to consider, doing this as a next step. And that feedback can be really helpful, particularly because it's coming from people who know, people who practice, the very same organizational practices that you do in terms of running a community action agency. And one incentive to sort of go down that particular pathway is to potentially apply for and receive the award for excellence that I referenced earlier, where a couple of agencies from the state of California have been so designated. But regardless of whether you seek that designation or receive it, as is usually the case, it's the journey that is most valuable, because it's that journey and that building of muscle memory that will really help your agency become more resilient. And one of the things that we saw during the last 2 years, I'll be really honest about this, the agencies that we have typically sort of seen as really effective, really well organized and very effectively led community action agencies, those were the ones that have gotten through the pandemic, a little better, a little more energized and resilient, because they had those systems and they were able to adapt and bounce back. So we know that the journey to excellence is a very valuable investment in helping your agency be prepared for whatever may come down the road in the future. So I'll hand it back to Mary Beth to get a little more into kind of what this journey might look like.
Erin, did you want to talk about agency partnerships?
Sure. I may have misunderstood where I was handing off, so I'm happy to do that. Sorry about that. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to hand off to myself. Hi, Erin. Thanks, Erin. What we want to do now is talk a little bit about how the org standards, which you probably know very well, we've been talking about them and you've been implementing them, how some of them differ from the standards of excellence. And obviously we don't have the ability in this workshop to go through every single one, but we wanted to take some examples just so that we could illustrate different ways that excellence really looks and feels differently from org standards. So our first example is agency partnerships. And if you think about what the org standards say about partnerships, it's a fairly low bar. The org standard says that our community action agency has documented or demonstrated partnerships for specifically identified purposes. Now, different state offices, kind of interpret that a little differently. So I can't speak for the California State CSBG office, but I can tell you that in my home state of New York, the way that standard is interpreted is show us some documentation that you have some partnerships. And if you can do that, you've met the standard. That's it. Are they good partnerships? Are they partnerships that demonstrate value? Are you measuring the return on investment of those partnerships? Are they strategic? Think of all the questions that have not been answered. And so then think of those questions and look at what the standard of excellence says. And this is standard of excellence 7.4. The agency systematically, there's that word, systematic, assesses, tracks, and reports current partnerships impacts / benefits over time. So just in that initial sentence, we've gone far beyond what the org standard says. It identifies opportunities to expand local relationships that support the organization's strategic and operational goals. The agency annually collects, analyzes, tracks, and reports tangible results of partnerships and uses them to improve current relationships or establish new ones. So just think for a moment, and it should be pretty obvious, how those standards differ from one another. And as sort of a next step, think about how those, living up to or implementing those standards, org standard 2.1 compared to the standard of excellence 7.4. Think about how resilient, how strong, how responsive your organization would be if it implemented one versus the other. Because clearly the standard of excellence offers so much in terms of, strategic value, that when something comes along, like a global health pandemic, for example, if you've been doing that, assessing, tracking, reporting, looking at the value, you would be in so much stronger a position when something unexpected comes along, because presumably you would already have been looking at, are we partnering with all the people that we need to, all the organizations that we need to, and where are maybe some new ones that we need to begin to look at. So just to take this a little further, sticking with that example of COVID-19 response, did your organization already have relationships that turned out to be really critical in COVID response, such as public health or other key community services? And you don't have to answer that. Certainly, if you have some thoughts that you want to share in the chat, please do. But many of us may have thought, well, we don't really do a lot in the public health sphere, so that's not really that really wasn't a highly prioritized partnership that we sought. Well, fair enough. But certainly as a result of what has happened, hopefully that thinking has changed and it's expanded. So it's like, well, maybe there's more we can do, even beyond what we needed to do in the last 2 years. And then a related question related to the pandemic: were you able to immediately review your current partnerships to identify opportunities to rapidly and effectively meet needs? And that goes back to something that the standard of excellence says, which is that you're tracking all of the relationships that your organization has. And many of those partnerships and relationships that we have really live in a lot of different staff. And so, when crisis hits, it can be difficult to know, like, well, who are all of our partners? Let's convene the management team and get them all together. But the standard of excellence says, no, you don't have to do that, because you track all of those relationships. You know who they are, what you do with them, and you can immediately sit down as a management team in a crisis situation and say, okay, where do we start? Which of our partners do we need to go to immediately? And who's not on this list that we need to start reaching out to? And then kind of stepping back more broadly, we always want to think about being strategic. And so again, a difference between the org standard and the standard of excellence: the org standard is just checking the box. You got partnerships? Great, you're done. The standard of excellence, though, is really asking one question throughout all of those sort of requirements of the standard. The one underlying question is this: are you strategic about your partnerships? Do your partnerships have a specific strategic goal that they connect to for your organization? Do they have specific deliverables in mind? Because it's always nice to partner. Having partnerships is just a good thing in itself. But given the finite resources that we have, it's best to be more concrete and think about specific deliverables that we kind of seek out of those relationships. Are your partnerships effectively leveraging resources so that you can reduce duplication, or maybe build community capacity? Because those are important things to achieving our mission as community action agencies. And are your partnerships approached with a growth mindset, so that you're always thinking of, what's the next step we can take? How can we grow this? How can we deepen this partnership? And I'm sorry, there was a comment in the chat, and I saw that my colleague just responded to it, and I'll just flag it to everyone. Lily said, a strength of our partnerships results from our willingness to step up during difficult times. We are sought out by our partners. And that's precisely why it's so important to invest that time in being strategic about partnerships, because partners see that. They see like that organization is really, they are a good community partner. And so when crisis hits, we want to work with them. Such a wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. And so what would this look like in terms of, real world? This, what would it look like implementing this standard? Doesn't have to require anything too complicated. You could have something as simple as a spreadsheet that you use that lists all of your partnerships and their purpose. You may want to start with identifying some measures of outcomes. Again, doesn't have to be complicated, maybe for each partnership. A simple question: what is the main thing we look to get out of this partnership, and are we getting it? Assessments of effectiveness, on some periodic cycle, maybe even once a year, like let's check in on that partnership. Where is it? Do we want to continue to invest in it? Or is it maybe not yielding the benefit that we thought? And then also make sure that this information is integrated with community data in your community needs assessment, because your partnerships can not only be a source of what's going on in the community. It's a great opportunity to learn from your partners what they're hearing, but also a good mechanism to see what's going on in the community and use those partnerships to develop strategic responses, either through new partnerships or new or different relationships with existing partners. And finally, just thinking in terms of systems, and we often like to use a sort of a continuum. You can think about a continuum where you might describe your organization kind of more towards one way or another. And the org standard end of the spectrum says, our partnerships are really highly dependent on staff relationships. And if person X leaves, then we really don't have a partnership there, because it really depended on that person. They have a good relationship with their peer, at that organization. So that's really a situation that we want to try to move away from. Ideally, more in the direction of being able to say, our partnerships are ingrained in our organization. We're known in the community, as Lily said in the chat. We're known as a partner. It's part of what we do. It's in our DNA. So we have multiple points of contact, multiple conversations. We have shared agendas for community change with our partners, and we collaborate with them regularly. Now, that's going to vary from partner to partner, but you can see the difference. The latter concept is much more of an integrated and holistic type of relationship. And it's also one that's institutionalized in your organization. So it doesn't depend on that one key staff person. That's really more the direction that we would want to go in. And I think that's a good example of how you can see a difference between what the standards of excellence say about partnerships and what the org standards say. So that's just one area where you can see that difference. And Mary Beth, how about another example from risk management?
Sure thing. So when it comes to risk management and risk assessment, you all know that there are some requirements in the org standards. One says that, Organizational Standard 4.6 specifically says that your agency has to do a risk assessment within every 2 years. And now, I just want you to reflect on how the risks that your organization faces have changed in the last 2 years. Is 2 years really frequent enough for you to do a really thorough and effective risk assessment process, truthfully? So the standard of excellence would say that you actually have to do a really thorough risk assessment at least annually. And specifically, the standards of excellence look to see that you have not just that comprehensive risk assessment, but doing some really deep administrative and fiscal risk assessment, because we know a lot of risk emerges from those areas. But this put around being annually conducted is really essential. In the organizational standard, The requirement is that you present the results of your risk assessment to the board. There's no requirement for what a process looks like, that you have any kind of system through which you manage risk, that you report risk, just that you conduct your risk assessment. So literally, you could decide to conduct your risk assessment. I'm not encouraging this, guys. It is not best practice to do your risk assessment, kind of in just a week before the standards of your org standards assessment is due. Not a best practice. The standard of excellence would say, yeah, you need to present it to the board, and also your process through which you manage your risk assessments has to be part of your formal agency financial management manual. So you have to have a process documented. How do you go about your risk assessment? Who manages it? When is it updated? You really want to have a very formal policy, because when it's everybody's job, it becomes nobody's job. So you want to be really clear about how you think intentionally about risk assessment. And then furthermore, we want to see that you are able to trend results over time on an agency-wide scorecard where you're tracking your performance to see how you're making improvements as it relates to risk and the risks that you've assessed. So it's not enough that you have a process. You need to have a process that is ultimately effective, that it actually creates change for your organization. And so you can see a couple of the comments on the slide that the standard of excellence really focuses much less on, do you have a risk assessment, and more so on the deployment and the utilization of that assessment for documenting improvements over time. It focuses on ensuring that you've got that really strong process for managing risk, and that you're documenting your results and tracking them using something like a scorecard, some way for you to regularly check in on your performance. Now, the organizational standards don't really have any, there's a few standards that talk about, are you looking at your results, but they're not intentionally looking at the results of your processes, your agency-wide processes, and checking in on that performance over time. The standards of excellence, throughout the standards of excellence, you will find references to, do you have this process in place, and what results is it creating? How are you tracking and managing them over time using a tool like an agency-wide scorecard? So you will see that scorecard concept come up more than once in the standards of excellence. Yeah, Aaron put it really well. While I just fumbled through that, he just put it in like 4 words. He said, the org standard says, do a risk assessment. The standards of excellence say, do something with your risk assessment. You actually have to use the thing and manage that process really well. Another area where you'll see some best practices from the standards of excellence is in board governance. So your org standard says that you have to meet according to your frequency and quorum requirements. But it doesn't say, how effective are those meetings? It just says you have to meet. Whereas the standard of excellence is looking to see that you're meeting all of your legal requirements, like meeting according to your quorum and frequency requirements, and structured according to the CSBG Act, but that your board has a clearly dedicated role of performance oversight that is visible via the minutes, via your bylaws, via other documentation that shows that your board takes that role of performance oversight very seriously. What evidence do you have of that when people are coming together? Are you a meet and eat board, or is the board really delving into how is the agency doing and what can we do to make the agency stronger and better? We also look to see that you have some board committee structures that are in place to demonstrate member engagement. Again, the difference between a meet and eat board and a board that is coming together to really serve the organization. So, the comments here is that you would want to see evidence of an active and engaged board in agency business and performance oversight, not being passive. So another example is the org standard says that you have to fill your vacancies according to your bylaws, which is very important. Please do that. The standard of excellence says it's not enough that you do that according to your bylaws, but you got to do it quickly. because we all know what it's like to have a longstanding board vacancy. It can cause all kinds of challenges for our organizations. But also, it's not enough to fill vacancies, but we need to assure that the way that we are filling our vacancies assures that our board looks like the community we serve, and that we are paying particular attention to diversity. And as I just said, ensuring that that the members of our board represent the people in our communities. And there needs to be some intentionality around that, right? You've got to think strategically and engage proactively in order to assure diversity on your board. It doesn't just happen. You have to manage it. There's a requirement in the org standards that you have a conflict of interest policy for board members. And then in the standard of excellence, we see that there's some requirements for formal agency and board conflict of interest policy. So not enough that you have a conflict of interest policy on the board, but also for your agency. I want to point out something Aaron just put in the chat too, and it's a really excellent point, that equity was one of the key themes when we updated these standards of excellence back in 2021. Equity was one of the things that the Excellence Commission really focused on, ensuring that the standards of excellence were pursuing and modeling equity. It was a major excellence practice. So yes, Aaron, thank you for lifting that up. You will see equity woven throughout the standards of excellence. They're not standalone requirements. They are woven within equity, because equity is baked into everything that we do as a community action agency. To be an effective community action agency and to be an excellent community action agency, we have to have equity baked into everything we do. Your org standards say that you have to have a structured board member orientation within 6 months of seating. The standards of excellence really go beyond that, looking to see that you have a systematic agency-wide board training policy. So again, not being ad hoc, not saying, okay, well, we've got some new board members, so how are we going to do our orientation? But that you have a really structured way to approaching both orientation and training of your board members on an ongoing basis. And that specifically that training that you do is reflective of the input of your board. You know, in order for your training to, if you want to figure out what training is most needed by your board, you should ask your board what training they most need on an ongoing basis. So ensure that you're getting feedback from your board, and then also not just that you're doing orientation and training, but that you're getting evaluations, that you're getting feedback about how effective you're doing and how you can improve for the future. A continuous quality improvement culture is an excellence culture. So that's another concept that you will see throughout the standards of excellence, is that that idea of evaluating how you're doing, getting feedback, and then doing some continuous quality improvement to strengthen those processes. Yeah, and Aaron put, we have a new board member, quick, let's get some sort of orientation scheduled. This doesn't happen in any CAA, right? I know we're all laughing at this moment. So those are a few examples of the practices within the standards of excellence. And you could see that in order to meet the standards of excellence, you do have to meet the org standards, right? The org standards, though, just serve as an initial step, and you really can go beyond with those standards of excellence. So with that, Aaron, I think I'm going to pass back to you to talk a little bit about strategic planning.
All right, thanks, Mary Beth. Yeah, so kind of our last area of illustration is strategic planning. And I think it's a good one because, you know, we all have to do strategic plans. I understand that you all are working on your community action plans at this time, and that those, you know, those often, or at least should, in many ways, connect to your agency's strategic plan. So I thought this would be a good topic to look at. Well, what do the org standards say about strategic planning versus what the standards of excellence say? So let's go through some of those. First, I want to start with the strategic planning shows up in several different places in the org standards, and I've taken some liberties to kind of boil it down maybe a little too simply. So, I maybe slightly oversimplified, but not by much. Here's basically what the org standards require us to do in terms of strategic planning. So, put on your hat of, checking the box, and like, okay, I'm just going to do the minimum. Here's what you need to do. You need to show that Roma or a similar planning process was used in the development of your strategic plan. You have to have a strategic plan that was board approved in the past 5 years. Doesn't mean anyone like looks at it or does anything with it. Your strategic plan has to be directed at some form of poverty reduction. That's pretty low bar to reach, right? It has to have some defined goals, and some measures. It has to be like kind of a plan. It does have to show customer input, and so that that usually would come from your community assessment or some other part of your planning process that shows that customers had some input. And then at least annually, within the past year, there has to have been some report shared with your board about progress. Now, keep in mind, that report could say, we have a strategic plan and we haven't made any progress. That meets the org standard, right? Now, your board would probably not be happy with that, and I'm guessing that none of us have done that, nor would we want to do that. But strictly speaking, you could have a strategic plan that no progress is ever made on, and the org standards say, okay, you're fine. You don't have to make progress. You just have to make sure your board is aware that you're not making progress. So that's what the org standards say. Well, the standards of excellence actually have several different standards that apply. And so I just want to sort of look at those quickly. I'm not going to go through these in depth. You can see the language of Standard of Excellence 2.1 is here. It's pretty wordy, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but Standard 2.1 talks about strategic plan. It's really development and deployment, your strategic plan and how it's deployed. So let's look at what this really boils down to. And as we do that, think about how it differs from the org standards that we just talked about. And Mary Beth has put the slides in the chat. If just in case that was difficult to read, you can get that off the slide, or you can access the org standards directly through the partnership website. So org standard 2.1 basically says that the strategic plan structure and content is integrated and institutionalized throughout your agency. And so what does that mean? Well, it means a few things. One, it means there needs to be evidence that your board actively uses the plan. So not just that they get a progress report, but that there's more evidence that the board engages the strategic plan on a consistent basis in terms of its oversight of the agency. The plan should also provide a framework for agency-wide management. So again, there should be some evidence that the strategic plan is used. Now, what that looks like could be different from one agency to another, but it certainly says your plan can't just sit on the shelf. The management team, the policies that management pursues, those need to show some tangible connection to the strategic plan framework. It also, the plan structure should guide staff activities and operations. So just like for management, staff priorities, staff focus, staff activities should show some connection to what's in your strategic plan. And here's another sort of enhancement over the org standards. Your agency's mission and vision, its goals, its poverty and equity focus should all be integrated into the strategic plan through a local theory of change. Now, I could ask how many of your agencies have a formal theory of change. I know in some states there's been an effort across the state to develop theories of change. In others, there hasn't been that much of a focus. But the standard of excellence basically says your strategic plan, well, it's of tremendous importance in terms of structuring your agency's activities. It fits within something even bigger, which is a theory of change. And so if you don't have one, this is a great opportunity to look into that. And I see Curtis Gibbs has posted a comment in the chat that the Community Action Partnership of Orange County does have a local theory of change. And they also have a really great strategic plan, because we just received a copy of it recently. So just want to say congratulations to CAP OC. Got a great strategic plan. And if other folks want to share their strategic plan or other agency accomplishments with us at the partnership, we love to see that. So please feel free to share with us at any time. And we'll give you a shout out when we can. Sticking with strategic plan standards of excellence, let me go to another standard, which is 2.2. And this has to do with the development of the plan and the updating of the plan. And again, we won't go through all the language of the standard, but the next slide will really zoom in on what the standard means. And what it really boils down to is that your strategic plan is a living plan. It is regularly reviewed and updated. It's communicated to stakeholders. So how does that happen? You have a structured process and timetable for updating the plan. It's not just, hey, we haven't looked at the strategic plan in a while. Maybe we should update it. Okay. There's actually a structure and a system for that. The standards of excellence actually recommend that the board engage in a semi-annual update and revision of the plan. Now, maybe not a full-scale revision of the plan twice a year. That's quite a bit. But that more than that once a year check-in that the org standards require, the standards of excellence say, really the best practice in the field is the board is engaging it at least twice a year. And some agencies even do it quarterly. That depending on how you use your plan, that may feel too much, but that may be the right rhythm for you. But the point is that there's some regular systematic engagement by your board. It's not just a kind of a once a year type of thing. Your community needs assessment is continually used to update and inform plan revisions. So it's not just, hey, 2 years ago we did our community assessment and that shaped our strategic plan, but we just did an update of our community assessment. So given that update, what does that say about our strategic plan? So you have a system in place to make sure that those updates are informing revisions of your strategic plan. And then finally, making your plan live means also making sure that it lives with your stakeholders, so that staff, community partners, funders, they know what your strategic plan is, they know what's in it. They're potentially engaged in revisions. And then when you update your plan, you communicate that to them. So that it's not just a living plan within your organization, but it's really a living plan with all of your stakeholders. And they feel that because that communicates to them. We strategize very seriously at our organization. And when we make a plan, a strategic plan, we live it and we update it as conditions change. It's a very powerful message to communicate regularly to your stakeholders. So another strategic plan element in the standards of excellence, and we'll cover 4 of them. So this is the third of 4, is thinking of your strategic plan as a way to promote growth by mobilizing new resources, programs, and partnerships. So again, what does that really boil down to? Really, it means that your strategic plan is strategic, and that it promotes your agency's continual growth rather than just sort of standing still. So specifically, the standard talks about things like developing resources beyond CSBG. And I've certainly seen so many of our agencies, who report, CSBG is a small part of our funding. We have so many other resources. That's wonderful. And your strategic plan should continue to advance that. Let's use CSBG as a way to grow additional resources. because that speaks really well to CSBG and its ability to catalyze resources, one of the legislative purposes of CSBG. Developing innovative programs and initiatives. Obviously, we can't just, be innovating, all the time. We have to take time to pilot, test, work out the kinks. But the strategic plan should make sure that it gives space to innovation, because sometimes we say, well, when we get to that, when we have time, if we can, we'll develop something new. Your strategic plan should make space for that. In addition to refining and improving what you're already doing, it should also promote innovation. And part of the purpose of that is to support equity. Because as I've said earlier, the Excellence Commission, and Mary Beth emphasized this as well, the Excellence Commission looked at the network, looked at best practices, and recognized that community action in 2021 and in 2022 and going forward, we are going to continue to lead in the equity space. And so our strategic plans should demonstrate that, should specifically demonstrate how we leverage our strategic thinking and our strategic actions to advance equity. And then kind of related to all of that, there should be something in the strategic plan that specifically addresses resource development. I said just a moment ago that the strategic plan should be used to develop resources. Well, one of the ways it can do that is to explicitly have as a goal, our agency is growth oriented, and one of our strategic goals is to, develop additional discretionary revenue or unrestricted revenue, or develop fee-for-service programs. You name it. It could look a lot of different ways, but having a goal that specifically focuses on resource development is really a best practice in the network these days. And then finally, as if that wasn't enough, with our strategic plans, we really need to demonstrate that we're investing in measuring our progress and then using that information to continue to improve. So looking at what that looks like. Our strategic plan has specific measurement indicators. Now, the org standards talk about measuring goals. The standards of excellence really take that a step further and basically say, not only do you have measurements and indicators of accomplishing your strategic goals, but you do stuff with them. So for example, your leadership team systematically tracks them. And so ideally there's either a scorecard that measures progress over time, or maybe a leadership dashboard that provides a moment in time snapshot of where are we and what do we need to do, or both. But one way or another, those measurement indicators are being used by your leadership team. And they should be used more broadly across your agency over time in some sort of an agency-wide scorecard. Now, your leadership team may use that, may use a dashboard or something else. But the key thing here is that across the agency, and that could include staff at all levels, it probably would include your board, and maybe even some of your community partners, depending on what strategic goals you're talking about. There should be an agency-wide scorecard that tracks where the agency is making progress in its strategic plan, and where it maybe needs to redouble its efforts. And then finally, everything that you do as part of your community action plan, other quality improvement plans, etc., all of those should connect to your strategic plan in some way. Now, it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a strained relationship. You shouldn't try to, sort of put a round peg into a square hole. But what this is really saying is that as an excellence practice, the judgment that you should use when you look at things that your agency is doing is, how does this connect to our strategic plan? And if it doesn't, or if it doesn't connect directly, should it? Now, there may be some times where, it's like, well, it's a point in time thing. It's something we need to do. It's not really part of our strategic plan, but it's extremely important. We need to do it. And that's fine. What this is really doing, though, is making you stop and ask, should we be doing things? Because a strategic plan, above all, is meant to help you as an agency say, let's not waste time doing things we shouldn't. And so the purpose of this piece of monitoring your strategic plan is, if you're doing something that's not part of your strategic plan and you ask, should we be doing this? Be willing to say, no, we shouldn't, because this is taking time and effort away from other things that are part of our strategic plan that really need to get done. And that can be a really hard thing to do. But a really high performing agency uses its strategic plan as an opportunity to really challenge itself. As Mary Beth said, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. That strategic plan can be a way that you say, maybe we need to say no to this, because we didn't include that type of an activity in our strategic plan. And that can be really difficult, but your strategic plan at least gives you, sort of an excuse, sort of a way to say, no, we agreed this was our strategic focus, and this is what we're going to do, even though it can be hard to say no. And that can be difficult, but a really high performing agency uses its strategic plan to help support those tough decisions when those need to be made. So you can see the standards of excellence really go way above and beyond what the org standards say when it comes to how you use that strategic plan. So I'm going to hand off to Mary Beth now to help us think through, like, okay, so we've gone through some examples. Where might we go next?
Sure thing. And I just wanted to call out, Lily just put in the chat, that applies to determining which opportunities to apply for. Does applying for this opportunity allow us to advance our strategic plan's goals? That's exactly right, Lily. And, we talk about using your strategic plan. One of the ways that you can use your strategic plan is to assess opportunities, funding opportunities, according to the priorities within that strategic plan. So perhaps you develop a process chart. I'm forgetting the term, but essentially through which you assess each funding opportunity against these certain criteria, and those criteria are based on your strategic plan. Yes, and Aaron said, don't chase every opportunity, even though some of them look really good. That's exactly right. It can be very tempting, but then in some cases, that's when you become funder-led versus mission-driven. You're chasing the money instead of the mission. It's a real challenge for our organizations who often don't have enough resources as it is. So just want to name that too. So we've talked a lot about these really awesome practices within the standards of excellence. And you might be thinking, well, wow, there's a lot in there. And what could I do to begin to think about these? So we have a couple of suggestions that you could do. One is just read the standards of excellence, go through them. See what you see in there, see what practices you see are articulated in there. Maybe you could identify in some of those organizational standards that you are already meeting, and then explore their associated standards of excellence and see, okay, so if we're already meeting this org standard, where are we in relation to, we know we're compliant, where are we in relation to excellence? That could be a really good practice for your leadership team to look at. You might also choose to look at an entire category of the standards of excellence and assess your agency comparatively to those standards of excellence. In Pathways to Excellence, one of the key activities within Pathways to Excellence is the practice of self-study, of reflecting, doing some really honest reflection about where are you today, so that you can identify gaps and know where to best focus your attention. Because as we just said, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So we do not have unlimited time and resources. So doing a self-study can allow you to really hone in on those areas that need your greatest attention in terms of continuous improvement. Maybe you can start very small too and just say there's one standard of excellence that we are interested in achieving. Pick one and begin to move your organization towards it. Just a few next steps. I'd be interested to know, based on this presentation, if there's any other next steps that you may take in your organization. You could throw those into the chat. We'd love to see them. And so, I just want to name this concept again, that excellence is lived, it's not achieved. You don't just achieve excellence and then you're done. We are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is a habit, not an act. So, think about your agency on that continuum, of we meet our funder requirements and produce our outcomes versus we don't stand still, we constantly ask what's next. Think about where your organization lives on that continuum and think about what your next challenge might be. And so I want to name a few resources that you can use to help you through this process of thinking about going beyond excellence. And don't pop off just yet, because I want to be sure I share a few things with you. Sometimes I know when we get to resources, everybody gets itchy, but hang on tight, okay? The first place to look is to our Pathways to Excellence webpage on the National Partnerships website. On here, you will find the standards of excellence themselves. You will find out more about the Pathways to Excellence program. You will find videos of recent webinars that we've done that talk about Pathways to Excellence if you want to learn more. If you're interested in getting started in excellence, we have the template for a board resolution for your board to support your journey towards excellence. We also have the template for conducting an organizational profile, which is a really essential first step towards excellence, is to get a good understanding of who your organization is and ensure that you have some alignment across your team about who the organization is, what your strengths are, and what your risks and weaknesses might be as well. And Aaron just put an important point in the chat, and then I'm going to turn to Curtis because I see his hand is up. Remember, you can access and apply the standards of excellence on your own. You do not have to participate in Pathways to Excellence in order to practice the standards of excellence. So thank you, Aaron, for lifting that up, because we would love to do the journey with you, but it is not required. You can take this journey yourself as well. So Curtis, your hand is up. Hello, good to see you.
So my question is, so as part of the bronze level of it, it talks about the senior management team or entire team that you've put together, go back and sit through a webinar or training on Pathways to Excellence. So, but which is, I'm sure that's a link that is sent off to whoever needs it. But how long is that training when you have to pull your team together to sit through it? And then, kind of related to that, I think in one place I saw that there was actually charged for the bronze, and I think I saw another place where there was no charge. So anyway, those are my. Well, as you can see, Capital C, we're looking to try and take us through that bronze level sooner than later. I think we're ready to do it, and so and then I took the implementer training, so I think that takes care of one part of it. Anyway, your response on those questions.
Yeah, so I want to applaud your interest in going through Pathways to Excellence. You just referred to our new tiered approach. In the bronze tier, there is a charge for that. It's $750. It's a flat fee. And I want to acknowledge that we just named and recognized our first 4 agencies in the network who have achieved the bronze tier. Would love to celebrate them. We have NewCap in Wisconsin, Community Action for Improvement in Georgia, Panhandle Community Services in Texas, and Eastern Action Community Action Agency in West Virginia. So as part of that tier, part of what you're doing is getting your foundations in place for the excellence journey. And so that includes getting your board on board with your journey, doing that organizational profile, assuring that we all understand who our organization is and our key strengths and opportunities and all of that good stuff. Also is, as Curtis, as you said, is assembling that excellence team, that team who's going to be responsible for overseeing the process of pursuing excellence and kind of keeping the light, being the light keepers for that journey. And then part of that is also the Pathways to Excellence, or the Standards of Excellence e-course. And what that e-course does is it really talks you through each of the standards, what the requirements are, and there's some activities, and it's all done within Moodle. And Curtis, as you alluded to, the e-course is made available to those either in the one of the Pathways to Excellence tiers, or we just opened up the possibility for agencies who maybe don't feel ready to go through Pathways to Excellence as an opportunity to take the e-course separately outside of Pathways to Excellence. Now, there's no recognition when you complete this course. You won't get to say you're a bronze tier agency of excellence, but this is really a really good learning opportunity for your organizations to think about the standards of excellence. Now, the e-course is self-driven. Each team member gets access to it. It takes somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 8 hours, but it's module based. So you there's a video that you watch. There's some you read the standards, and then usually there's a follow-up activity. And there's a total of Aaron, I'm blanking. It's nine or 10 modules in total in the e-course. So, some of the videos are longer than others, but I think they max out at about 20 minutes. So somewhere in that vicinity of 6 to 8 hours, and team members can do that independently in a time span that works for them. So Curtis, I think you have another question.
Yeah, so is this what's now required of the entire deployment team, that everyone needs to sit through the e-course for Pathways to Excellence? Is that, again, I saw, again, it talks about it, but I couldn't figure out what that training was that's required for the entire team.
Yeah, so the entire team is required to take the e-course if you are in the Pathways to Excellence program, if you want to achieve the tier. Everyone who's on your excellence team, now your excellence team should be pretty small. I want to say smallish, right? Probably no more than 10 members, because they're really in charge of leading the charge on excellence. And the reason that we require the e-course is because it's essential that the entire team know and deeply understand the standards of excellence. So that is the goal there.
You've answered my question. Thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah.
And there's is that currently free for everyone? Is that, it says enroll up to 100 staff or board, or what's the cost for up to what? So that's the other. Or does that come with the 750?
Yeah, so with the 750, with your enrollment in Pathways to Excellence, you get e-course access for your agency excellence team. Okay, so that's your smaller team. You do not get e-course access for your entire staff. We are now opening up this subscription. There is a fee for it, and there is some information on the Pathways to Excellence page that we just put up. There's different levels with that, Curtis, so I'd recommend going to check that out. There's member versus non-member versus those enrolled in Pathways. So there's several elements, so I can't give you a flat answer. But this is a new option for folks who are interested in doing the training for their entire staff, and sharing out those best practices in their entire agency. Well, I'm saying entire, up to 100 staff is what I mean. So recognize that some of our agencies have far more than 100 staff. So Aaron, what am I missing? What do you want to add?
Well, I guess the thing I want to add to this discussion is that what we're trying to do with the partnership is make resources available in as many different ways as possible, so that agencies that are sort of in different places or want to take a different approach, have some flexibility. So, so the bronze tier that we've been talking about is really the is sort of the narrow path of working with an excellence team, learning about the standards together as a team through the e-course, and then using that knowledge to sort of build out systems and practices throughout the organization. That's kind of what that approach is looking like. An alternative is to say, like, we don't really need that type of approach at our agency. What we want to do is just make sure that all staff are able to access these standards. We're going to make it part of our training, and then we will sort of chart our own course in terms of how we implement, some of these standards. And so those two options are just different options for agencies to approach their excellence journey in their own way. One of the benefits of the bronze level, quite honestly, is that there's a lower cost, and you get a little more sort of one-on-one support. But the benefit of the other is that you get a lot more access to the e-course at a slightly higher cost, but you don't have that same sort of guided sort of support as you go through your excellence journey. So we'd be happy to talk offline with folks about which option would be better. Or if there's even a third or fourth that you think maybe we should consider offering, because it's really about just trying to support all of you in terms of the direction that you and your agencies need to go in to better serve your communities. Whatever we can do to support that, we'd like to help with that.
Thank you, Aaron. Those are great clarifications. So yeah, if you guys ever have questions, you can also email us at excellence@communityactionpartnership.com, and the excellence team is always happy to answer Pathways to Excellence questions there as well. So the rest of these resources are ones that you are likely familiar with. We've talked about our website has great resources on organizational standards. We have a whole landing page dedicated to organizational standards. We've got all of those great T&TA guides for you to learn more about what is required, but also how you can begin to think about going beyond compliance. Within Moodle, within Community Action Academy, we do have an e-course on some of the org standards, and specifically an introduction to the org standards. We have a number of webinars on our website, so check that out. We also have some great webinar series recorded on our website about kind of a deep dive into some of the org standards, so you can check those out on our website. I think we've talked before that we have the Risk Summit with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center is available for all community action agencies to attend at no cost. The partnership has already paid for your registration. Even if you missed these first two sessions, which were held on April 5th and July 20th, you can still register today and attend the October 13th session live and access recordings from the prior two sessions. Sometimes I think folks expect the Risk Summit to be maybe a little dry, or maybe they think risk isn't my job. And I'll just share with you that the Risk Summit has got some of the best content around, really great speakers, really engaging and all-encompassing for your organization. So highly recommend you check that out. And by the way, it's free for you to attend. We hope that we will see you in New York City. Registration is still open for our annual convention. You can attend in person or virtually. Do note, though, that registration is closing very, very soon. So we hope to see you there. And with that, Aaron, unless you have anything to add, I think we'll say thank you. Oh, you have something to add?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I noticed that we invited folks to contact either me or Mary Beth at any time, and certainly that's true. But also just want to add a third name to the list, Tawny Stottlemyre. Tawny is taking the lead at promoting the excellence program. And so if you have an interest specifically in that, feel free to use her as a resource as well. And don't tell her I told you this, but you can use her as a resource for other things too, because she's brilliant. And we love having her on our team. So, feel free to contact any of us at the partnership at any time. We're always happy to talk.
Well, with that, I think we will say thank you for spending your time with us. It's been great to do this series with you. I understand you have one more session in this series that will be led by the amazing David Knight to talk about strengths-based needs assessments. Lawrence, maybe I'll pass back to you to talk about that. And I'll say thank you again.
Yeah, thank you both. It's been fantastic information. I'd like to get the audience's opinion on that. There's a link to a survey in the chat. So do take a couple of seconds to click on some responses for us. Let us know how we're doing. And the next session will be on August 17th, and that is focused on conducting your community needs assessment. David Knight does have some fantastic tools to share to help streamline that process for you, maybe introduce some new concepts. So we're excited to see that. And we look forward to seeing all of you attend that, and tell your colleagues, tell your planning colleagues, that's going to be a good session for the CNA process. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you again, Mary Beth and Aaron, for joining us.